Is the Earth a small place? It doesn't seem that way from here. Space is supposed to be infinitely vast. Then why do we, space nauts, feel as if we're being suffocated? If there's a Gundam series that seems to be perpetually dismissed and slept on, aside from Double Zeta and Victory, courtesy of message boards and video essay midwits poisoning large swaths of the common consensus, it'd probably be MS Igloo. It is very much a travesty, given that the series in question is, in my opinion, genuinely one of the best Universal Century side stories that the franchise has to offer. Definitely not something you should hand-wave away because of must CGI.
The first series after Mobile Suit Gundam is a little-known one called MS Igloo, and let me tell you, it is absolutely shit. Like, there is nothing redeemable here from story to presentation. Igloo has some of the worst CGI I have ever seen. It looks worse than PS2 cutscenes.
At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
As vapid and inane as these takes might be, I'd rather spend time on going over stuff I find cool than dunking on low-hanging fruit. You know, names are bound to change over time, but stupid takes will persist. So, why even humor them? First things first, what is MS Igloo? Well, it is a real robot OVA series spanning 9 episodes, separated into 3 sub-series, 3 episodes each. These are called MS Igloo The Hidden One-Year War, Apocalypse 0079, and MS Igloo 2 Gravity Front, having come out in 2004, 2006, and 2008 respectively. Unlike the animated entries that came before it, this one opted for CGI, although it is far more polished than Green Divers and Evolve, with the animation quality being more akin to the 2004 Polar Express movie. In terms of staff, this show was in very competent hands, being directed by Takashi Imanishi, who had Gundam 0083 Stardust Memory under his belt, and one of the 2 main writers, Hiroshi Onogi, already worked on Zeta Gundam, Elgaim, and Razafon. The brunt of the mecha design was done by one Yutaka Izubuchi, who's known more for his costume designs in Gundam Wing, as well as designing the new Gundam, the High Gog, Gym Sniper 2, and several Axis Zeon grunts in Gundam Double Zeta. Suffice to say, he did an outstanding job on the show's mech designs, namely the Zuda. So did the other designers, such as Hajime Katoki of Sentinel and Unicorn fame, responsible for the Hedolph Mobile Tank, and Kimitoshi Yamane, who did some of the designs on MS Igloo 2, not to mention the show's score, done by Megumi Ohashi, who went on to make tracks for Seed Stargazer. The show's characters are likable and complex, making the most of the show's 9-episode runtime, and getting decently fleshed out as it goes on. Overall, we're looking at a solid lineup. However, to do the show justice, I'll be going over the plot as well. To be specific, I will be going over the story of the first 2 Igloo entries. Not because the third one is lacking, quite the contrary in fact, but MS Igloo 2 is more of a collection of self-contained stories, not a more serialized plot like the other 2. Now, throughout MS Igloo and its continuation in Apocalypse 0079, we follow the crew of a refurbished and retrofitted civilian freighter named Jotunheim that the Principality of Zeon pushed into service under the 603rd Technical Evaluation Unit. The bridge crew of the Jotunheim consists of the freighter's captain, Martin Prochnow, Erlicht Kruger, first officer and a close friend to the captain, second officer Jane Xavier, who serves as the ship's operator, Domenico Marquez, third officer and a helmsman, and as for the technical evaluation staff itself, there's Technical First Lieutenant Oliver May, First Lieutenant Hideko Washiya, and Special Operations Captain Monique Cadillac. The trio is the focal point of the story, although everyone gets their share of the spotlight. The story itself starts in January 0079, with Oliver May, an engineer by trade, getting assigned to the newly formed 603rd Technical Evaluation Unit. His superior, Rear Admiral Alberto Schacht, seems almost apologetic about the whole ordeal. Understandably so, given the place he's sending the young man off to is something that he personally describes as a witch's brew. That and his hands are effectively tied on the matter. In no uncertain terms, Oliver's job in the 603rd will be to deploy and evaluate various technology that the Principality has developed. What the episode opens on, in fact, is the transfer of one such prototype to the Jotunheim freighter ship. About midway through though, it gets intercepted by 2 Musai-class space cruisers, which forces the freighter to retreat, much to the chagrin of Alexandro Hema, the ship's resident gunner. He absolutely hates the idea of leaving the allied Musai and Papua ships behind, but shows helplessly watching the latter of the 2 perish. Once the battle's over and the remainder of the cargo gets retrieved, Oliver returns to the bridge, to which Captain Prochnow asks him about the casualties aboard the Papua. It's made quite clear that he cares about the men under his command, as well as having genuine remorse about the toll this operation had taken thus far. The other two arrivals on board are Monique Cadillac and Hideto Washiya. Of the two, Monique proceeds to refer to the Jotunheim as a rust bucket, and reprimands the captain for choosing the lives of his crew over trying to retrieve the cargo, which prompts Martin Prochnow to call her a troublesome passenger as he shakes her hand. She is very much an outsider, being sent to the ship by the Principality's brass to oversee the unit's operations. As for the first Lieutenant Washiya, he appears to be of a much more awkward and meek demeanor, being another officer assigned to the Technical Evaluation Unit. Right from the get-go, the start is somewhat rocky, but things have to carry on nonetheless. The prototype being tested is the QCX-76A Jormungand, a huge plasma beam cannon. In theory, this one could be used to make mincemeat of enemy ships from far away, which is what catches the attention of the Jotunheim's designated gunner. Before they could discuss the matter any further, the comms line up, telling the Jotunheim to get out of Dodge. Right by the freighter, a fleet of Musais and a now derelict space colony advance onwards. Monique states that it's the Operation British. Within 72 hours, the colony will impact the Earth. Hearing this, Oliver tries to confront her about what happened to the colony's residents, and after failing to rebuff him, Cadillac admits, with a mix of frustration and helplessness, that despite her rank, not even she was let in on what the operation was supposed to involve, let alone the casual nature in which the top brass decided to co-opt the space habitat as ammunition for their opening salvo. Several days later, the Jotunheim is deployed at the Loom Theater near Side 5, getting hailed by the nearby fleet. To no one's surprise, Chief Gunnery Officer Alexandro Hema is giddy about the chance to repay the destruction of the Papua in kind. Unfortunately for the excited gunner, the leadership didn't only not count on them when planning out the battle, they left them out of the equation altogether. This, alongside the details of the Operation British, also starts nudging a wedge between Monique and the top brass, given that they screwed her over twice now, repaying her dedication with apathy and assigning her here. She wanted to do her homeland proud, and now she's stuck at the backlines, forced to watch as others fight and die in her stead. The combat between the Zeon forces and the Federation fleet commences. At this point, it is obvious that the 603rd is grossly under-equipped for the situation at hand, which will be a pattern throughout the show. Alexandro still needs proper observation data to target and snipe at the Federation fleet effectively, but since they're more or less cut off, he won't get any for the foreseeable future. The gunner gets impatient, shoots prematurely, and almost hits a cruiser. Oliver and First Lieutenant Washiya scramble in an observation shuttle to assist him, but a formation of Zakus flies in above them. Sharaznable is in there as well, having the courtesy to give them a heads up about the mobile suits being deployed. In Morse code, but still, it's a nice gesture. It is these suits which deal a decisive blow to the enemy fleet, and flat out confirm to the 603rd that they were to be treated as a decoy from the very start. The Jormungand catches a few strays, mortally wounding Alexandro and prompting Captain Prochnow to call off the operation. Surprisingly, Monique does not object, or even pout. In fact, she is the one who suggests a retreat first. To make things more troublesome, a damaged Magellan-class ship is heading straight for them. There's only one man left at the cannon now, who's still clinging to life, but in no shape to move out. Oliver's shuttle goes to pick him up, but Alexandro protests, stating that even if his trade is becoming obsolete, he still wants to leave his mark on this new era. The Jormungand fires one last time, demolishing the approaching battleship in a single hit. In a post-hoc report, Oliver May laments not only the loss of Alexandro Hema, but the wasted potential of the prototype, since the 603rd could have been able to provide frontline support in a more substantial manner, should the main force actually bother to coordinate with them. This more or less sets the tone for the rest of the series. At its core, the trade that is the military is eerily similar to blue-collar work, both with their structure, general strain on those who are in it, and of course the common pitfalls, although multiplied many-fold in comparison to the latter. Still the same headaches, but give or take a few piles of corpses, of both friend and foe alike. And this show certainly does a great job at emphasizing this aspect. Continuing onwards, the second episode also gets a cold open, this time featuring a war crime. A Federation squad, led by one Federico Zariano, performs a false flag attack on a Zeon supply depot in Arizona, using a pair of captured Zaku 2 ground types. Meanwhile in the orbit, the Jotunheim is sent to assist with supply drop operations. This is being overseen by Monique Cadillac, who's acting like an overzealous shift supervisor, or as Captain Prochnow likes to put it, a Yorkshire Terrier of his mother back home. Nonetheless, as the captain ponders on how effective these drops will be, especially as the battlefield shifts, the Jotunheim releases the much-needed cargo into the atmosphere. accompanied by other freighters that do the same. Back at Side 3, Alberto Schacht has another task for Oliver May. Once again, the former is quite displeased about having to dump a fool's errand onto the shoulders of the young engineer. This time, it involves the re-evaluation of a prototype tank named YMT-05 Hadolfer, which was a project the top brass already shelved. In truth, the command just wants to deploy it in combat and then leave it there once the tests are done. Furthermore, Alberto explains to Oliver how much of a logistical shitshow the Earth campaign currently is, with each new front becoming a resource sink at an alarming rate, despite what the official reports may state or embellish. Regardless, the tank is loaded onto the Jotunheim, and Oliver can't help but wonder whether the 603rd and its personnel is much like the tank. Of some utility, but similarly disposable. Oh, and Major Demazir Sonen is here. He's been assigned to the Jotunheim as the designated tank pilot. Once a prodigy in tank combat, the man has been reduced to the shell of his former self, developing chronic tremors and relying on pills to keep them at bay. Despite Oliver's feelings on the matter, Sonen is quite excited to pilot a tank once more. This enthusiasm, however, wilts once he spots Monique Cadillac, having heard that she will be in charge of the tests. It certainly doesn't help that she calls him out on his bluff that is trying to redeem the Hadolfer's name, and even calling him a barking dog. The two aren't on the best of the terms, to say the least. Now on the way down, now aboard the Komusai, Oliver asks Monique the obvious, given that she's been putting the tank pilot under a somewhat disproportionate amount of scrutiny ever since he arrived. Her retort is simply, "Oboete okinasai. Tai wa kusate mo tairi. Gunjin wa kusate wa nora inugai." Remember this, a rotten sea bream is still a sea bream. A rotten soldier is worse than a stray dog. In layman's terms, she used to have a level of reverence for him, back when he was a tank instructor. However, after he failed to learn how to pilot mobile suits, he was overtaken by despair and self-pity, becoming a man who's trapped by his own past, bereft of a purpose, or a drive to get back on his feet. Monique is admittedly quite harsh on him, but at the same time, she isn't exactly wrong. Enter the Semovente squad. These are the same troublemakers from the start of the episode, staging a massacre on the nearby supply depot and even attacking the Komusai. Sonen insists Monique and Oliver drop him off so that he can cover their vessel in his Hadolfer. He jumps out in the tank and immediately starts going after the enemy force. As Oliver points out, the tank's firing system isn't even calibrated, yet its pilot already dispatched one captured Zaku and heavily damaged another. Sonen almost instinctively reaches for his dope medicine, but immediately puts it down. Right as the enemy starts to advance, he pulls the tank back, peppering the battlefield with indirect fire. The comms are down, but he just shrugs it off. Hits one enemy with a napalm shot, then finishes it off with an APFSDS dart. Others give chase, and even try to flank him, but even despite being outnumbered 4-1, 6 if you count the 2 Type 61 tanks, the Hadolfer still keeps up. One lucky shot dents one of the treads, but before any of the captured Zakus land a follow-up hit, Sonen pops smoke dischargers. Using this opening, the tank transforms, and mangles the leg of the enemy's Zaku 2 commander type using a machine gun, then bisects the nearby Zaku with a point-blank cannon shot. Even so, the MG is running low on ammo, so he shreds an enemy mobile suit next to him and grabs another one, immediately killing a tank. Another Zaku tries to go after him, so after disposing of the second tank, Sonen turns his attention towards him. The mechanical cadaver of his previous assailant got into the tracks, but our tank pilot, being the resourceful guy he is, uses the cannon's recoil to get himself back up, and then finish the enemy off with a flechette round. Sadly for him though, he missed one. Federico, the commander of the Federation squad, managed to survive the attack, attacking the tank at point-blank range. And even despite his best efforts, Sonen takes a couple nasty hits, and a 120mm shell right into the cockpit. Despite being 1 foot in the grave, he still musters up enough strength to kill Federico, then drifts off, content with having saved the Komusai. In a stark contrast to her previous remarks, Monique is dismayed and saddened at the loss of the Major. That tank may have been a failure in the eyes of the top brass, even disposable, yet due to the heroics of a soldier past his prime, it was also the reason why Monique and Oliver got to live another day. The third, and in the case of the Hidden One-Year War arc, the penultimate episode, is one that's a little more well-known, and for a good reason. It features the EMS-10 Zuda, a swift and lightweight mobile suit which is seen intercepting and chasing away a platoon of balls. It's also the debut of one of my personal favorite instrumental tracks of the show, Kido Sen, translating to Mobile Warfare. There's a reason Igloo's arcade intro in EX Versus uses that one. It really underscores the sheer velocity of the Zuda. Back with the Jotunheim and the 603rd, we get a rather embellished description of the mobile suit, before being thrust into the technical evaluation unit's usual routine. They're testing out the Zuda, with some help from Zemad's test pilot, Jean-Luc Devol. Though in truth, the machine's initial deployment here is mostly just for show. As overjoyed as Captain Martin Prochnow is that the brass finally gave them something seemingly worthwhile, Alberto's words back at Site 3 tell a different story. He flat out admits to Oliver that the EMS-10 is mostly another propaganda tool, a bluff even. The front, down on Earth, is going to hell in a handbasket, and one of their key strongholds in terms of logistics probably won't hold out for too long, considering the sheer amount of Federation forces involved in the counteroffensive. On top of that, EMS-04, the previous model of the Zuda line, went into pieces during the tests. Despite Oliver's insistence that the unit can still operate somewhat formidably, it sounds more like he's trying to convince himself of that. As he leaves, Alberto also shows him the state of the Federation's mobile suit development. Their RX-78-2 model is leagues ahead of its opposition, much to the young engineer's horror. Still, the combat tests for the Zuda continue, with Devol and Washia piloting Units 1 and 2 respectively. Unit 3 is piloted by Ochinan Shell, whose name is not mentioned in the OVA. It is the free unit that does the fatal mistake of putting too much strain on the engine, which results in both the machine and the pilot getting torn to shreds. Understandably, Hideto Washia is fucked up by the mishap that cost him a pilot. So is Devol, although it's more because the pilot's dying words were a call for help. A call for his help. Shell both trusted and looked up to him, and because of a rookie mistake, the young man was guaranteed a closed casket funeral, assuming there was enough of him left to put into a casket in the first place. To rub more salt into the wound, Oliver has concluded that the data recorded before the engine failure of Unit 3 are matching way too closely to the data from the initial testing, leading him to believe that if there were any changes made to the EMS-04, they must have been nominal at best. When confronted with the discovery, Devol gets furious, and would probably shove the poor engineering nerd into a locker if it weren't for Monique calling the two to the bridge. They are greeted by an intercepted Federation PSA, which mockingly points out what we already know. The EMS-10 Zuda is just the same, albeit slightly tweaked failed prototype, running on fumes and empty bravado. The leak was probably done by a defector from Zeonic, and despite Jean-Luc Devol's protests, the proverbial cat is out of the bag. In no uncertain terms, the 603 was played. Devol was also played, and the convenient lie they've been told got a man killed. Regardless, there are more pressing issues at hand. The survivors from the last Battle of Odessa are drifting, or as the captain puts it, drowning in the Earth's orbit. Given Jotunheim's proximity, Captain Prochnow orders an immediate departure to save the grunts. There's still a fair amount of time before any backup arrives, and the Federation platoons of Luna 2 waste no time, deploying balls to slaughter the defenseless troops. And defenseless they truly are, considering that the Zaku 2 ground types in the HLVs are ill-equipped for zero gravity and at best can flail about, drowning before getting ultimately struck down. Witnessing the grim sight, Monique Cadillac orders Zudas to sortie to quote-unquote resume their tests. Oliver wants to object, aware of the risks present, but before he gets on her case about potentially sending 2 more pilots to their deaths, Monique states that she's going to be putting her life on the line as well. This is a nice character moment, because up to this point we've mostly seen her talk the talk, but now she proves that she's more than capable of also walking the walk. As one might expect, a space-worthy mobile suit, or so the 3 of them, were just the force multiplier they needed, with Monique and Devol taking out the balls while Hideto helps out with rescuing the stranded Zakus. Their triumph, however, is short-lived, since the Federation deploys mobile suits of their own, even striking the Jotunheim with a few shots. In that very moment, Jean-Luc Devol tells the other 2 Zuda units to continue with the rescue, as he tries to engage 6 RGM-79 GMs all by himself. Right from the get-go, he shreds one with the machine gun, skewering the pilot of another with the shield spike. Despite having taken out 2 of their guys, the Federation squad begins to taunt and ridicule him. Still, the only injury Zuda Unit 1 has sustained throughout the fight was to the pride of its pilot. The remaining 4 GMs can hardly keep up at this rate, as Devol taunts them with his machine's agility. All 4 of them run after him, which prompts Monique to go as well, since, let's face it, he's probably gonna try and pull some risky stunt. Oliver gets assigned to watch over the reserve unit's engine, and the chase continues. We also see Devol shit-talking the Feddies, since he's got them outpaced in a much less formidable suit, especially in their eyes. The engine begins to redline, as Unit 1 flies towards Dawn's light. He won't be leaving this world a coward, somebody who had to use his company to save face. Nay, he shall depart with dignity, having put his all into getting the most out of the Zuda, as well as making sure his comrades make it out alive. One GM tries to retreat, but gets intercepted, i.e. shot to pieces by Monique. In spite of Oliver's insistence, Devol keeps going as he goads the enemy pilots into redlining their units as well, and subsequently exploding. With no regrets left, he too becomes a shooting star, composed of burning metal and ashen flesh. The sacrifice was not in vain, since most of the survivors from the Odessa base were retrieved safely. As for the Zuda Unit 2 and the Reserve Unit, they are to stay on the Jotunheim, being a cause for both concern and relief. After all, having mobile suits on board, as helpful as it may be, could make it much harder to escape the maelstrom of war. Now, in Apocalypse 0079, the utter Charlie Foxtrot that is the late one-year war for the Principality gets even more hellish. Definitely more desperate as well. Behind the enemy lines, a specialized unit gets deployed to dive into the Earth's atmosphere once again, with its pilot watching helplessly, as the ship that allowed him to launch gets obliterated. The ship in question was the Muspelheim, another freighter conscripted into service as a part of the 604th Technical Evaluation Unit. Its loss was quite the bitter one, since its captain was someone Martin Prochnow of the 603rd knew personally. In fact, Captain Rudel was the best man on his wedding. As such, it comes as no surprise that the Jotunheim's current mission is to finish what his friend gave his life for, with Monique lamenting the absence of Prochnow's usual more pragmatic self. You see, with the main force pulling back into outer space, the top brass had decided to use the surplus of parts for the amphibious MSMO-7 Zagok for an interception machine known as the Zgok. Outfitted with a variety of projectile options, courtesy of multiple disposable weapon containers, it's meant to be used for attacking enemy ships being launched from a Federation base in South America. The pilot for this one is Sub-Lieutenant Werner Holbein. He's a Zeon Marine who comes from a long line of fishermen, and the second he gets on board, he goes looking for the captain, much to the chagrin of Monique Cadillac, who technically outranks Captain Prochnow by 2 ranks. Completely unprompted, Werner also shows a rusty harpoon tip, a memento from his grandfather, the Vice Captain Erlicht Kruger, stating that Grandpa Holbein fought a shark with a harpoon like that. After the fight though, only the shark came up floating. Hideto asks whether his old man perished in the waves, to which he sternly replies that he's probably still around. Underwater, for 20 years at this point. Fate certainly has a taste for irony, sending a fisherman's grandson to dive into the skies, hunting for enemy ships. Still, the Marine doesn't mind reenacting Major Kong's bomb ride from Dr. Strangelove, and goes out a-fishing, giggling like a maniac the whole way down. Upon sighting the prey, he defers to his own instinct, pulls up a bit closer, and fires the mounted cruise missiles. They miss, albeit barely, after which the Zgok gets picked up by a nearby Gau. As the Jotunheim's bridge crew go over the captured footage, we see Monique and Oliver argue over the cause of the failure. The former thinks it's the fault of the pilot, whereas the engineer thinks it could have been a mechanical error, since the weapons used weren't completely up to snuff. The conclusion they come to is that somebody has to tag along with the Marine and monitor the situation. So the question is, who gets to draw the short straw? Unluckily for First Lieutenant Hideto Washiya, who comes into the room, his timing couldn't be any better. Thus, he gets voluntold to hop into the Zgok as well. As such, the second drop is a go. Now there's 2 people laughing as the unit hits the atmosphere, and the Jotunheim has to pull back early, since there's enemy ships in the area. The loadout for this attempt are 28 dumbfire missiles, and with a target in sight, Werner gets a lock on, and almost immediately has to evade incoming anti-air warheads. He dodges them all, and impressively, he sees them coming much earlier than the Zgok's own radar. At this point though, he sadly lost too much altitude to strike down the ships, but at the very least, he saved the Washiya's bacon, and proved himself a formidable pilot, in spite of the attempt itself being a failure. Back on the ship, preparations are underway for the third attempt. After inspecting the Zgok, Oliver passes by Monique as he's going through the hallway. She's also burning the midnight oil, but in place of her usual reserved demeanor, she tells Oliver that he should get some sleep. She should too, but she's on an errand, not that the young engineer isn't on one as well. Still, it's nice to see her warming up to the crew, being a bit less stern and starting to get somewhat amicable. More surprisingly yet, she invites Oliver for a drink, which he politely declines, mostly because he's got his hands full at the moment. Afterwards, inside an empty comms room, Oliver goes looking for the Marine. Werner's taking a break inside the Zgok, getting up once the engineer starts talking to him over the comms. Going by Hideto Washiya's account, the Marine has done quite formidably in the second sortie, and Oliver would like to know the guy's thoughts on this little drop operation. With increasing volume of Federation patrols, intercept systems, and other defenses, things are definitely looking more and more troublesome by the day. They might be blown to smithereens tomorrow, who knows? As the battlefield gets more and more dangerous, the 603rd gets handed more and more improvised weapons, or prototypes with limited utility for quote-unquote evaluation. All that despite the fact that under current circumstances, any data obtained from this effort can't be properly utilized and built upon. Furthermore, the battle is moving to space, and hanging out behind enemy lines is starting to seem more and more like a death sentence, which also understandably gets on Monique's nerves as well. As such, what Oliver intends to do is to try and contact the engineering department about halting this operation, since it's all going nowhere. Werner, the Marine, simply answers, fair enough. His job description, after all, does involve being frequently up the shit creek without a paddle. There seems to be ill wind on the horizon, but if the sea wills it, he shall emerge above the waves with a catch. If not, he'll just have to dive again and again, much like the engineers aboard. The next day shall be the date of the third and the last drop. The loadout for the attempt number 3 is a hefty scattering beam cannon, which, while jury-rigged about as much as the previous loadouts for the Zeegok, might be what improves the machine's chances at success. Werner snickers. Monique is pleasantly surprised about the Marine not complaining, and the drop is a go. It has certainly been expedited by 2 Federation ships going after the Jotunheim. Captain Prochnow orders for the drop to begin, even after the Jotunheim is being shot at. In spite of Monique's objections, the Marine is right. This very much is the last chance to drop the Zeegok, not to mention, the captain is set on carrying on his late friend's burden until the very end. Long story short, Werner dives into the cloudy skies below, a bunch of enemy ships take off, and despite the turbulences, minor technical hiccups, and the sheer speed of the descent, the Marine manages to take out each and every one of these vessels. The bad news is, his ride home in the nearby Gao gets shot out of the sky by a squad of Core Booster 2 intercept types, with the Zeegok taking several bad hits, sending the machine falling into a nearby ocean. Presumably Atlantic, since Jabro is somewhere near Brazil. At the very least, the pilot can rest in the tranquil waters. A burial fit for a man of the sea. Over on the Jotunheim, Sub-Captain Erlicht Kruger confirms the Marine's kill count. The man's whereabouts being sadly unknown. As for the errand Monique was on earlier, she mentions doing some digging and apparently, Grandpa Holbein departed this world on a hospital bed at Side 3, not at sea. Well, he did, as Oliver interjects. At least to Werner. The ocean of his heart, as Prochnow adds, with Monique mourning the loss. Still, the tide of war is unrelenting, ravenously swallowing up good men, and only leaving bones behind amidst the burned debris. The space fortress Solomon has fallen, with the front moving towards Abawaku, and by proxy Side 3. I'm starting to feel bad for poor Alberto Schacht, always being the bearer of bad news, but it appears that even in this turmoil, the 603rd will be dragged onto another battlefield. They've been given a so-called mobile pod Augo, which has technically been greenlit already and rushed into production, but orders are orders, so the Jotunheim is getting deployed at Abawaku. If there's any solace to the current situation, it's that Alberto should be able to get them resupplies and such more easily, should they hold out long enough. Despite the circumstances, Monique is feeling somewhat confident about their chances. They may be outnumbered quite heavily, but seeing this many fleets gathered in one place seems to have reinvigorated her resolve to keep doing her best for her country, the hubris of top brass notwithstanding. Over in the hangar, we get a look at the Argos, and yeah, they're very much a stopgap unit. In Jerry terms, the Argo is the Volksturmgewehr VG-1-5. If you prefer Rusky terms, it is a late PPS-43 Sudeyev submachine gun, which is to say, if you had to use one, you're in for a bad time. They can carry standard Zaku weaponry, which should simplify resupplies, but that's assuming the poor hunk of scraps can even survive long enough to be resupplied in the first place. Oh look, a Gelgu! Maybe they're finally getting something remotely… well. This is Herbert von Cuspen. If the Hugo Boss attire and his smug demeanor didn't cue you in already, this guy's a douchebag, who somehow managed to fail upwards. Going by his landing in the hangar, he's not particularly competent either, but he's visibly overcompensating with his attitude. Monique Cadillac even beats Captain Prochnow to the troublesome passenger comment. A good portion of the people that knew what they were doing was lost over the span of this war, which is why we're stuck with this loser. He says something along the lines of new elites arriving, but to his disappointment, the troops he gets is a bunch of high schoolers that got enlisted at the last second. So, there go his ambitions. And the captain can't help but be utterly disgusted. The kids are doing their best though, having trained extensively via simulations, and even unanimously volunteering to fight. Granted, with conscription being inevitable, they pretty much just ripped off the proverbial band-aid a bit sooner. Monique comes to mock Cuspen, but freezes up on seeing Cadillac Jr. Her little brother Erwin, of all people, is here. Understandably so, considering the competence of the hands the boy is in. Still, with the Federation's main force heading for Abawaku, the Jotunheim 2 sorties. Monique does get on Erwin's case for volunteering for the meat grinder, since there's no one to take care of mine paws back home, but it is what it is. It was a question of time until the boy would have had no say on the matter anyway. The two bicker for a bit, But ultimately both come to the terms with the fact that they're stuck on this ship and at the very least, if worst comes to worst, they'll at least die together. Back to Kessen, he, or more than likely one of his superiors, has decided it's a good idea to go to the moon and attack the obvious diversion that's on the course for Granada. That, and he's gonna try and ask for backup from Granada as well. A rather short-sighted idea, since a force that small can obviously be handled by whoever's in the vicinity, so he's basically rushing for the easy pickings, hoping it gets him a promotion or something. The guy even skimps on how many units will sortie, choosing to deploy merely 3 Argos. Not the 2 Zudas on the ship, not going out in his Gelgoog, not even using the number of Argos at their disposal to his advantage. As misfortune would have it, Erwin's assigned as the formation's captain, alongside Friedrich Cattell and Franz Bland. They get in the Argos, and we get a brief yet quite wholesome conversation between Oliver and Erwin, where the former is very apologetic about sending him out in this sick joke of a contraption, while the latter thanks Oliver for always looking out for a boy's sister, and the letters she sent him. She spoke fondly of the guy, although she did also call him a nerd on an occasion or two. Regardless, the engineer says that if Erwin makes it out in one piece, him, Monique, and the boy could go grab something to eat together. At that moment, the colony laser back at Site 3 fires, evaporating a chunk of the Earth Federation's fleet, Kurenzabi's dad, and General Rebel, making the big detour Kessen had them do even more pointless. Nonetheless, with 2 Salamis-class ships approaching, each carrying 3 balls, the Argos have to sortie on Kessen's orders. The Fedi troops are also greenhorns at best, so at the very least, there's something to offset the numbers advantage. Oliver is pulling double duty, assisting the Argo squad and fetching observation data in real time. 2 of the balls get shot down. Then Cattell gets killed due to a part malfunctioning. Kessen is still being stupid and not allowing for any backup, despite having the resources to do so. Erwin freezes up from all the death around him, forcing Monique to get on his case until finally, the self-preservation instinct takes over. The boy charges in, takes out 2 balls, then manages to talk down the last guy after a bit of fisticuffs. All things considered, he did good. Sadly though, the 2 Salamis cruisers were still around. Shot at the Jotunheim, blasted both Erwin and their own guy, who was also just a kid to smithereens, before being struck down themselves by the Granada's reinforcements. Forgive my verbiage, but Kessen's a fucking idiot. I'm sorry, but that's how it is. He failed upwards, prioritized his ego over the lives of the people under him, and now a bunch of children got torn into ribbons because of it. Now Monique has one less person to come home to. Her own flesh and blood god, because a certain retarded piece of shit decided to make his own incompetence everybody else's problem, and it goes downhill from there. In the 6th and final episode of this particular story, the battle goes on, since despite the colony laser being deployed and fired, it didn't thin out the Federation's numbers enough, which still leaves a good chunk of the main fleet going towards Abawaku. As for the Jotunheim, it gets a brand new quote-unquote mobile armor, although it is more than obvious that it's pretty much just a mobile supply depot bolted onto a big row, alongside a couple more weapons on top of that. If you ask Oliver, he'd say it's a harebrained idea to use a mobile armor that was built for mobility as a basis for something so bulky and cumbersome. This thing, dubbed the Big Rang, was more or less made to provide support and resupplies for the Argo mobile pods. The 603rd's orders are to cover the E-field, which is pretty much the real lines. For reference, here's a picture, showing the nomenclature for other fields, Abawaku's relative position to the approaching fleet, as well as the relevant locations. Infield is what gets hit first, specifically with a massive barrage of missiles, likely launched from the rather abundant public-class space assault ships. There's also a follow-up in the form of a pincer attack, with several squads of RGM-79 C-Jim Kais being deployed. Before long, even the less saturated E-field gets stormed as well, with Kessen ordering the Jotunheim to scatter Argos out on the battlefield. The Big Rang still has no designated pilot, with Monique clearly not being in shape to pilot it, and Dato being already assigned to the Zuda unit too, which means that Oliver May gets the short end of the stick, still submerged in her sorrow. Monique tells him that if he were to see her brother, the engineer should say hi for her. As for the Argo formation that's gonna be getting deployed, there's a total of 32 units, which is 2 more than the current lineup of high schoolers on board, considering the last episode, so I'm guessing some technical staff is getting voluntold as well. Having witnessed many of his colleagues biting the dust up to this point, Captain Prochnow is at a genuine loss for words in regards to what to tell the youthful rookies before they sortie, so he just tells them to try and survive until he finds his answers. Things are looking dire, with everyone on board and even outside pushing themselves to their limits. At last, the Argos launch, with their well-timed deployment, allowing them to score some easy hits on a nearby enemy platoon. Jotunheim's still getting shot at, and as the ship evades, the Big Rang finally shows up. Oliver May is for the first time forced to kill somebody. with the somebody in question being 3 Federation ships and their respective personnel. He's here as a soldier, aware of the high toll that has been paid both in development and the operation of weapons much like his. Even so, he is determined to see this through, with Argos at his side, and a bunch of observation modules, courtesy of Jotunheim. He goes on to do exactly that, cutting through the enemy formation with beams, missiles and machine gun fire. The chaff screen helps quite a lot as well, although the Argo formation has already started taking losses. Still, this stunt did give the 603rd enough breathing room to resupply the Argos, as well as recovering as many allied troops as they can. We also see the last fleet running off, and the HQ is pretty much in disarray. Abawaku already fell, with the last message from the command telling all ships to cease combat and act according to one's own discretion. Thanks to the 603rd's defense of the E-field, several allied fleets could take their tired and wounded back to their homes. Herbert von Cuspen, however, wishes to either continue the hostilities or flee himself, pointing his handgun at the captain and ordering him to prepare the Gelgoog. Although there is another gun drawn at Cuspen's head, ready to pop it open like a watermelon. That's right, Monique is back, and in a much better shape, telling the little turd to lead by example he sets for others. Outside the ship, meanwhile, a Federation platoon has decided to ignore the ceasefire, since there's nobody around to stop them from committing actual war crimes. Well, nobody on their side anyway. Monique has sortied in her Zuda reserve unit, alongside Cuspen's Gelgoog. Despite being outgunned and outnumbered, they try and fight their way through. Oh, and Cuspen gets shot to pieces. Good riddance. Oliver and company also sustain a lot of damage. With the defense complete and the Jormungand out of harm's way, Captain Prochno sets on a course home with a heavy heart. The battle is over, at last. All of a sudden, Hideto in Zuda Unit 2 spots several silhouettes. 2 Argos returning from portside, he says. Behind them, more survivors follow suit. There are 7 more Argos, 2 friendlies, one in a Zaku 2 and one in a Gelgoog B-type, judging by the backpack, as well as Monique Cadillac's reserve unit. In her mobile suit's palm is Oliver May, who's still in one piece. The long and arduous journey of the 603rd is finally at its end. Suffice to say, this is why I love the series so much. It is very down-to-earth in its portrayal of characters, with their own agency, aspirations, and so on. Captain Martin Prochno starts out very pragmatic, almost to a fault, unwilling to take any risks, and while this remains somewhat similar by the end, he certainly has moments where he's willing to put his neck on the line to see things through, both in the case of the Zegok's third drop, and his efforts to retrieve as much stranded personnel as he can at Abawaku. Monique, once a strict officer and adherent to the cause, mellows out, growing to care for the people under her command, eventually understanding the captain's perspective and even going out of her way to assist her allies in the reserve Zuda unit. Oliver attains a much more confident demeanor and a stronger resolve, and even those who didn't make it out in one piece at least went down, leaving a legacy. Hemme and De Vol left their marks. Sonnen got out of his slump to protect his colleagues and one of his former students. Werner did his best and found peace in the waves, while Erwin's sortie resulted in improvements to the Argo, minute as they might be. And Cuspen? Well, he made for good fertilizer, assuming anybody bothered to scrape the giblets out. The other aspects of the show, such as the musical score, mechanical design, and the utterly uncompromising choreography of the entire battlefields unfolding in front of your very eyes, I believe do speak for themselves. The show's a genuinely good watch, and it's merely 9 episodes long, 6 if you just want to follow the main story thread with the 603rd. It's not that big of an ask in terms of time. If you can't handle the CGI, then it sucks to suck. The graphics are pretty much on par with MGS3 Snake Eater on the PS2, which also debuted in 2004. So I earnestly doubt that a little CGI should be what's stopping you from experiencing a great story. It very much is an acquired taste, and you might just have to bear with it. Again, it's not that long. Still, I really enjoyed that one, and made my case for why I think so highly of it. So at the very least, I appreciate the fact that you sat through all this, regardless of whether I sold you on the series or not. From what I've seen, the novel for this one is pretty much one-to-one to the OVA, featuring really nice illustrations. There's also the Igloo 603 manga, which adds more interesting machines, such as the Jim Camuth, but sadly neither of those two are translated. I don't do these long entries particularly often, so I'd like your thoughts on it. Until next time, like, subscribe, maybe put your 2 cents in the comment section down below. And this has been the Shirt Lad, signing out.